So let me just start off with a little picture here. The picture is about tools. And the idea of a tool that I once learned how to use when I was about 15 years old. Does anybody know what this tool is? Yeah? What do you call that, Randall? We would call that a circular saw.
A circular saw, yeah, or a table saw.
And it's kind of good for making straight cuts. That's what it was made for. And when I was a little kid, my dad had one that looked a lot like this lying around in the workbench. They're really dangerous. I mean, honestly, you really shouldn't touch these things. They spin alarmingly fast, and they are annoyingly sharp. But if you're just making a straight line cut, they do a much better job than the old-fashioned one. So I guess you could say I became addicted to it, meaning that whenever I needed to cut anything, like a bike jump, or if I was making a tree house, I'd get this thing out, and I would cut it. And I just wanted to tell you a story about something that happened when my mom and dad kind of either allowed me or asked me to do some paneling work. And I had to make a little bit of a curved cut, and this was my saw. So I reached for my saw, and I tried to make a curved cut. The best I can say is I made it work, but there was a lot of friction and heat. It kept trying to kick back because it was the wrong tool for the job. I needed to make a curved cut. I needed something that could adapt. And it wasn't adapting at all. And so I probably almost killed myself. I hardly got the job done. But my whole talk in some ways today is about having the right tool for the job. And I want to bring up a certain tool that we've invented. And, you know, as leaders of organizations, we have to get them to act in certain ways. And there's a sense in which, if you think about Henry Ford's problem, it's how do we get a bunch of people who we don't really know that well and we probably can't afford to trust? It might be as many as 15,000 people. How do we get 15,000 people to focus on these tiny, repetitive, somewhat disconnected tasks? Because that's what the Industrial Revolution was good for. It was taking streams of production, workflows, and snapping into tiny little bits where a person became very, very efficient at something that was fairly repetitive and you could teach somebody fairly quickly. And in a sense, that's a motivational problem. How do you manage that situation? And, you know, I think this picture does a little bit of justice, but so many of us know about the assumptions underlying the Industrial Revolution, and so many of us have been in jobs that put us to sleep. Maybe you haven't. I've had a number of jobs that have nearly put me to sleep. It wasn't the first month that was the problem. It was the second year. And so there's this issue that we never really liked it. But that's why they called it work. If it was fun, they wouldn't pay us. You know, there are ways of coping with this. There's still me on the weekend. It's like a commute to Saturday. You know, there are ways of sort of living this life. And, you know, it may not be humanistically satisfying, but it kind of can get the job done if things are very straight and predictable. And you don't need much agility in going around curves. Because I guess you could say that we think management is a sort of a tool. And the tools that we use to manage the humans were inventions, for the large part. And then we have to start questioning whether those are the right tools for the job. And I stumbled on the centerpiece of my book 2 years ago, and I was surprised. I was really surprised. As a psychologist, I think they ought to teach people this. But they didn't. Nobody really taught me about this. Maybe it's too new. When I was in undergrad, this wouldn't have been invented yet because we hadn't really invented fMRI machines yet. But you would have thought that by my PhD, somebody would have mentioned this. It's a part of our brain that could be called the Ventral Striatum. That's the fancy word. There's a guy named Jaak Panksepp who is he's a neuroscientist, but he studies the emotions, affective neuroscience. He calls it the seeking system. And I think that's going to sell more books. So I'm also going to call it the seeking system, rather than the ventral striatum. But what you need to hear right now, it's an actual part of our brain that urges us to be curious, to try to understand the boundaries of our environment and push on them a little bit, to see our impact on the world and see why things happen. It's urging us to do that. And when we follow those urges, it gives us a little sprig of dopamine. And dopamine's a very nice drug. The cousin to copium. I don't know if you actually know much about this, but it's kind of a cousin to cocaine, meaning it's an enthusiasm maker. It's not like a put you to sleep sort of drug. And so what this means is we have within us a physical center that asks us to push on boundaries and learn new things, try to understand cause and effect. And for Henry Ford, this was a problem. This was a bug in our system that had to be ironed out and swatted down. So we had to look for controls and extrinsic motivations. Obviously, you're not going to want to do the same thing day in and day out for 5 years. But what if we dangle this over here? And what if we measure you really carefully? And what if we say we'll fire you if you don't do it our way? Tools of the trade got the job done as long as you know that Henry Ford was able to make those cars in one color for 10 years. Actually, 11 years. Guess what color? Black. Then, after 11 years, consumers' tastes changed. I don't think we have 11 years anymore in our businesses. For if you're in IT, I don't think you have 11 weeks. The path to competitive advantage is a lot more winding. It's not such a straight shot where you can predict for a decade or even half a decade what's happening. And there's this idea now that we need something different out of the workforce. We need people to think on their feet like owners instead of waiting to be told what to do like robots. We need people to be creative and listen to what the customer's asking for and then help us create a solution proactively. Take risks, try something new, innovate. Well, these may not be the behaviors that are lined up with the old technology, with the old tool. So that's something I want to introduce something quite strong. I mean, it's actually somewhat disgusting, so get ready. It has the benefit of being true, but it's mean. It is mean. Where's my little timer, by the way, back there? Anybody know about learned helplessness? Some of you have heard of Martin Seligman, though, right? Martin Seligman is one of the sort of parents of positive psychology, but he didn't start that way. He started off shocking dogs. Martin Seligman, now he didn't do it for shits and giggles. He was writing a pretty intense thesis at the University of Pennsylvania on learning theory and the ability to generalize learning. And it was really very important, but I can say you wouldn't be able to do this experiment today. So what he would do is he'd put a dog in a little box that looked like this, and then he would shock one side. And it was a little bit difficult, but the dog could hop over this hurdle. The shocks hurt enough that the dogs yelped and whined and ran around and urinated. But eventually, they would find their way over that hurdle. Sometimes they would fall over it. When that happened, they experienced sweet relief. But then he'd shock the other side. Aha, they would say, after hurting and maybe urinating again, I know how to solve this. And get back onto the other side in a much quicker response time. And he would do this about 4 times, and the decay went like this. It was learning theory being generalized. There was a lot to learn there. And then he did the meanest thing, which is shock both sides simultaneously. Well, if you were that dog, you might jump back and forth. Because you'd jump over thinking, oh, sweet relief, no, it's not. Then you go back over, no, it's not. He did that about 4 times, and then he just lied down and took it. That's called learned helplessness. What the dogs learned is there was nothing really to be done except shut off. And I'm afraid this is what we're doing to our workforces. I'm afraid that because we've set up KPIs and controls, external rewards and punishments, because our goal is to catch you out when you're messing up. Your experiment, yeah, we call that failure because it didn't work perfectly. No, I know we told you to take risks, but not the ones that messed everything up. We wanted the innovations that worked, not all the innovations. We want your unique ideas, but as long as they follow our prescribed policies. When you take risks and get hurt, you learn not to take risks. And just save that for Saturday. So I'm afraid, in a pretty obnoxious story, but again has the benefit of being true, we can start to look at how maybe our old technologies have created the very disengagement that we're now trying to fight, but we're trying to fight it using the same tools that we invented in 1900. Ways of controlling behavior. So, most of us know about the fear system. This is something I learned about a long time ago. We know where it comes from. We understand the drugs and we understand the behaviors. For example, if you're walking out in a forest and something is running behind you very fast, and maybe it's even faster than a human, you might experience something called fear. You might report a feeling of anxiety. And then there's a drug. That corresponding drug is called cortisol, and adrenaline, by the way. And these drugs do certain things to you. They're unconscious. They happen to you. They make, for instance, you focus on the threat, and they screen out the rest of the world. Whatever the thing is that's attacking becomes the center of the world, and the only thing your body is able to take in is information at that point. And so the action tendencies, what this drug makes you do, is narrow focus. And the most interesting part for me, and for Henry Ford, is if the threat comes from your own organization, your own group, fit in, conform. Now, these are evolutionarily sound studies. This is called evolutionary psychology. I don't really want to go into that, but I bet you a lot of you know about a lot of this. I don't think this is that new. What was new to me is we also have something called a seeking system. And when people light this up, they feel curious. They feel excited. There's a different drug. Instead of cortisol, it's dopamine. And that drug has different action tendencies. Rather than focus, it's broadening. Let me play around with what I already know. Now this is, if you need a researcher to go along with this is Barbara Fredrickson 101. She is another one of the parents of positive psychology. And if you want a great book about this that lays out the science, Positivity is a really good place to start. But there are 35 years of evidence on this now. And the idea that maybe some of you are having is, which one is better for today's modern conditions of management? What are most leaders looking for in terms of the action tendencies? Do we want submission and narrowed attention where we tell you exactly what to do and you focus? Or do we want playing and exploring around and experimenting and learning from the environment? Well, the answer is probably a little bit of both. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at how it's hard to have both. Say you have an automobile. Let's say that you're going 60 miles per hour and you slam both of those to the floor. What happens? You crash. Does the car accelerate or decelerate? Try it. It decelerates. Take the risk. If you're standing still in the car and you put both to the ground, the car doesn't move. The brakes are stronger. Just like fear is stronger. Bad is stronger than good. Ray Baumeister wrote a whole article called Bad is Stronger Than Good. It is really very clear that the fear systems are stronger than the seeking systems. They're immediate and more visceral. So, if you are a leader that says, well, I have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, it's going to be hard for you to pull that off. As long as you have KPIs and measurements and control systems and punishments in place, that anxiety is going to be hard to override with a bit of joy on Friday. A simulation session. So we need to be careful about fear being kryptonite to the seeking system. And there's a whole biology under that, and I wrote about that in the book quite a bit. That's not something I'm saying lightly. I'm not saying, wouldn't that be funny if that were the case? I'm saying that in rats and cats and dogs and cattle and humans, that happens. A puppy that is afraid is not a puppy that plays. So, to turn to the last little bit before I put it out to you and we have our first little chit-chat, I actually see this as a cause for great happiness and even optimism. I see that there's a lot of change going on in today's world, and you could argue more than ever. For instance, if you have this one thing called a telephone, it's not very useful if one person has it. Do you know what I mean about distribution? Until you hit the S-shaped curve of distribution, even 10 people with a telephone is not that useful. But if you talk about 50 million people, then it can start being useful. And it took 75 years to get there for the telephone. How long did it take for the TV to get to 50 million people? What do you reckon? So that would be 13, pretty close. And then the internet? I can remember when they tried to introduce this. I was at Cornell University. It was 1991. They were trying to get us to use something called bear mail. We all thought it was stupid. Because if no one's using it, then it's dumb. But it took 4 years. And then you can say, what about 1 billion users? You know, how long does it take Windows versus Google versus Facebook? And you can do this all day long. I know, given your careers, you do this kind of stuff for a living. And there are so many things that we're doing to ourselves right now that seem to make companies that we thought were bulletproof quickly seem irrelevant. Companies that 10 years ago were worth $90 billion don't exist anymore because they couldn't adapt. They couldn't change, couldn't make the leap, couldn't be agile. What it's looking like right now is we need a new tool. And if we're managing organizations, we need different outcomes in terms of behavior, but we still might be pushing the buttons of the old saw. It's going to create a lot of stress and a lot of friction and a lot of heat if you try to guide the wrong tool to do a job it wasn't made to do. Now, you might almost be able to make it work for a little while, but eventually you're probably going to get hurt. You're probably going to chop off some fingers. So my first question to you is turn to the person next to you and just spend 10 minutes. And the questions are kind of funny. I think if you didn't see the first part of the talk, you would think I was insane. And that's okay. I think that the first question I'd like you to chat about is, in your work situation, would you say you're shocking the dog? Or would you say you're the dog being shocked? And the answer can be both or neither. So go ahead and just take 10 minutes and chat about that, and then we'll get back to work. We're going to do a little vote now. And do I have to click on this, or will you just put it up there? I think you'll probably just put it up there. But what's going to happen is I think they're going to put up a thing that has a, do I click on it maybe? I haven't done this a lot. But it's going to have a little code. So you type that in, slido.com. And then you're going to vote on, each person's going to do their own. In my own work situation, I am shocking the dog by not allowing people to use their seeking systems. I am the dog being shocked because I cannot use my seeking system, both or neither. This is pretty good given our careers, you know what I mean? Both is seemingly winning. It's really fun to use this, I feel. You know, it sort of is like the Spotify revolution. I wonder what we would have predicted. You know, I wonder what we would have thought before we got the data. It's quite a bit more both than I would have thought. And this notion of being the dog being shocked, just to play that back to you in the way that I feel it, in the way that I mean it, each of us has an innate, built-in system urging us to create and play, fool around with the boundaries, and understand our impact on the world. But we often have a technology, a tool, that is making that really difficult to do any of those things because the job is very parsed and it's very hard to see the cause and effect. And whenever I try to experiment and play, well, then it takes up time and then I get punished for not doing the thing that I was told to do. And there's just no time to experiment and play, so I kind of just have to do the thing. And this reflects why, we know that between 70 and 80% of humans are disengaged from work. This would be the global Deloitte polls or the global Gallup polls. It's reliably above 70%, and 19% are actively disengaged from their work, meaning they're disgusted by it. They're disgusted by their craft. Let me just say it in a weird way. They're disgusted by the thing they do for most of their waking hours on the planet. Actively pushing away, repulsed by what they do. So when I talk about the human emotions, and then I talk about the golden age, what I hope to be pushing out to you gently is that for organizations to win in a volatile environment, we're going to need to start triggering some of these seeking system positive emotions. And firms that can't or won't do that will probably not be around for much longer. And firms that do learn how to do this develop a competitive advantage because the seeking system is the emotions of agility. The seeking system is what creates the emotions that let you pivot and be agile and learn fast and try new things. So possibly, if you believe in my optimism, it's saying that the faster the change comes, the quicker the organizations will die that shock the dog. Now, if we're Schumpeter, which many of us are not, we call that creative destruction. We're not so fussed by it. But if you're one of the people leading one of those firms, it often feels like you're responsible for keeping it alive. And that's often the position we're in. So that's why I think this is so relevant to all of us. Our final analysis then looks to be most common answer by a long shot is both. Second most is I feel hurt. I don't feel like I can use my seeking system. And we're pretty senior. Think about people in a call center or taking your order at a fast food chain or, most jobs. It probably is a little worse. And then neither or neither, that's what we love. And those of you that are in that situation, I think you should take a deep look at how you're setting up your HR systems and make sure that you keep embellishing on that. You consolidate and embellish. You continue to build upon. It's a gift. It's a joy. Both literally, it's more joyous to come to work, but also it's something that's future-proofing you because it's going to lead to emotions that let you adapt. So, and I guess it's not really a surprise that nobody themselves said, I'm shocking the dog. Nobody's asking me to do it. I'm just doing it. None of us think it's maniacal. None of us think it's evil. Henry Ford and it wasn't evil. It was about efficiency. It was about customer demands. It was about democratizing the automobile. It was about high quality. It's about regulations. Nobody thinks it's about maniacal evil. But the unfortunate result is. Okay, shall we go back to our regularly scheduled material? So this is an experiment done by a Harvard professor. And what she did is had people come into the lab, just off the streets of Boston, and they had to sing this song in front of an audience that they didn't know. And before they were going to walk up and sing that song, they were randomly told to say one of two things. They were either going to walk in front of the people and say, I'm really excited to sing this. Or they were going to walk in front of the people and say, I'm really anxious about this. They had to say one or the other, and then they sang the same song. And then what happened is, there's this great software that we make called Karaoke Revolution, and the cool thing is, it grades them. Just like Guitar Hero, it knows if you hit the high note, and it knows if you hit the low note. And so this karaoke revolution becomes the dependent variable, if you will, as a how good of a singer and how much you nailed it. What do you think? Could that one little word, anxious versus excited, could that make a difference? But still, they have to stand in front of a group of people. This is a stressful world, isn't it? And yet, it was a 30% difference. 30% difference, objectively judged by software. Well, I sent this off to be published, and the reviewers said, very interesting, but that's just singing. Of course we know emotions influence singing. So she goes, well, let's do it again, only this time let's do a maths test. So she brought people off the streets of Boston, and she put them in these little cubicles. And right before they were going to, and she stressed them out. She said, this is an intelligence test. And at the end of this, you're going to know how smart you are relative to everybody else. But right before you start, I want you to read out loud what comes up on the screen. And half of them had flash up, I'm nervous. And half of them had flash up, I'm excited. So the same stress maybe was interpreted in different ways because the excited team was statistically significantly and substantially better, almost a full grade point average higher, moving from a C to a B on average. Same questions. She did it one more time, and the last time was public speaking, a little bit like this. You got to get in front of a room full of people. You have to give a 5-minute speech. And all those people then judged how effective and persuasive they were. Statistically, significantly, substantially better when they didn't know what condition. But if they said, I'm excited or I'm... So there's something that's going on here about the way that we're treating stress. And if you treat it with emotions that say, I'm excited and curious to see, it seems to create a different outcome than if we say, I'm nervous and I'm fearful of what will happen. Now that's cueing it or triggering it in a very easy way, but I sort of dug in a little bit more. Her name is Ellison Wood Brooks, by the way. It's a really fun study. You can check that out. But I just dug in and wondered if maybe this isn't related to the notion of triggers that we have access to with the seeking system. You know, just saying I'm excited or I'm anxious, yeah, that shows kind of the tip of the iceberg, but Jaak Panksepp very clearly spells out, he's written a textbook on this, affective neuroscience. Look for it in a bookstore near you. And in this textbook, he lays out very clearly, there's a whole chapter devoted to this. There are 3 triggers of the seeking system. So I just plumbed those and put them in this book. And here they are. Number 1, you get people to think about experimenting and playing at work. And he calls this a safe social space where people are allowed to or encouraged to just play around. Now, you would have heard of some of these. And I've used some of these now in companies. For example, you would have heard of Atlassian software Daniel Pink made really famous in his book Drive, where they just give people 3 times a year a full hour, and they used to call it FedEx days. And the idea was you just messed around with whomever you wanted, wherever you wanted, on whatever you wanted, but in 24 hours we all meet back and just tell each other what we tried and what we learned. I went to Deal Logic here in London, and I helped them do a little something where did the exact same thing, but as they presented, here's what we tried and here's what we learned. The board, the CEO, the CFO, the COO listened to all this, and the ideas they liked, they invested in. We called this creative capital. They invested not with money, though, with time. We let them job craft. So when the team presented something that was cool and they liked it, they said, next week, we want you to take 2 full days just working on that. We'll find some other way to get your work done. 2-3 weeks later, 70% of those projects were coming to fruition with products and services, changes in policy, changes in billing, changes in the way that we do business that actually made the organization better, and the people loved working on it because it activated their enthusiasm. The technical word is zest. That's the psychological word for what this description is of this enthusiasm. Let me tell you something about zest. It excites me a lot. Zest is when life feels like a treasure that you can't wait to unpack. The opposite are minor depressive symptoms. When it's just really hard to get out of bed and life starts feeling like a hassle. Time becomes a problem instead of a treasure. So humanistically, we're talking about something very, very deep and important about the nature of living and the experience of the journey. I find it really interesting that we, literally, have a pretty big opportunity to make life feel more worth living. And when I say golden age of human emotions, what I'm saying is it happens to also be what your organization needs right now. So that's the first one. The second one is a woman named Janet Ducher. She's now done 3 studies, you can check these out, where she hooks people up to fMRIs. And half of them, she just gets to write about whatever. Let's say a tea kettle. Not that there's anything wrong with tea kettles, just something to write about. And other people, she has write about their signature strengths, what they're capable of, who they are when they're at their best, what are their core values. And those people, the ventral striatum lights up. They get a charge of dopamine. And it turns out that as humans, thinking about our potential, our capability in the world, our unique strengths and what we bring to a team that's unique, that seems to light up the seeking system, creating zest and energy, giving us this enthusiasm. And then the third one, which I've already mentioned, is this notion of the why of the work that goes beyond the money. That who does the work affect? There's a number of really interesting studies on how organizations that connect the worker to the end result of what they produce not only feel more meaning in their work, they produce better results. In one really interesting study, this guy at MIT took folks in a fast food establishment, and half of them, he gave them little iPad monitors that the cooks could see who was ordering. That's all it was. So with every single customer, you saw who ordered the egg, or who ordered the bacon, or who ordered whatever. What they found is those people were substantially happier with their work, those that were able to do this, and the customers were statistically happier with their food. One of the things when he dug this out, his name is Buell, when he dug out what was happening, there was a number of little innovations that they did in real time. For instance, what they used to do was they'd fry 5 eggs. Every time someone ordered 1, they'd do it 4 or 5, and then the next 5 eggs that were ordered, they'd just give the other eggs, and that meant 4 people got not fresh eggs, and the last person maybe even got a cold and somewhat hardened egg. For the people that actually got to see them, they're more likely just to make the eggs fresh for each person. It's very interesting. What seemed to make the workers more happy also made the customers happier with the production of the food, and yet they didn't know what condition they were in. The customers didn't know that. So it's really very intriguing what is possible here. What I'd like you to do now is pair off again, and maybe it's somebody different. I'd pick somebody different just to move the energy around a little bit. What would you say your HR systems are or could be built around the seeking system triggers? And I have a little chart here that you could kind of use. Just that's not seeking system. That's adrenaline and a little bit of cortisol. That's a little bit of cortisol, just a touch. Piquant flavor. I don't know which ones, but along the top, I put maybe some different HR systems: hiring, onboarding, feedback, performance management, pay bonus, training, L&D. You could put more on. And then around here, which one prompts experimentation? Which ones emphasizes the strengths? Which ones helps people experience purpose? Just have a chat about that, and then we'll do another vote, and we'll see how that goes. Technically, that wasn't quite 10 minutes, but I really don't want to overstay my welcome here. But do you mind, just for the fun of it, typing in the thing again? And we've just got a second voting opportunity where, the answer might be many of them. And if that's the case, just pick the one that most focuses on activating the seeking system. And if it's none, that's okay too. It's part of what we want to learn. But my guess is that one of these do the best job of it. Yeah, that's very interesting about the training, learning, and development. As I was thinking about these slides, I thought, to be honest, the learning and development, if done the right way, is activating the seeking system. That's sort of what it's made for. But I got to tell you, lots of firms have L&D that doesn't really activate the seeking system. I've taught those sessions. In name only. Okay, that's lovely. It looks like the clear winner is training. I find it really compelling that hiring and onboarding, because I can tell you that's when you have a real fresh chance. You know, there's that one chance to make that first impression, and I've done some research suggesting that how you manage that first day and even that first hour actually has impact on how they feel 6 months later. So, okay, some really nice catches there. I think that at this point, why don't we go back to the other presentation? I feel like, given the relatively short amount of time that we have left, I think that rather than going through these and kind of doing a rush, I can do that. I was going to give you maybe an example in each of these different domains, like I did with the deal logic example I gave you. I wondered if maybe we could just have a little bit of dialogue or a little bit, things that you thought were particularly either appalling or interesting or even surprising that you wanted to ask each other. Take the knowledge in the room and focus it. Anybody, please?
We know, I think, as a parent with 3 kids who are going onto social media, the impact of digital technology on our children. Every time we press like or go on to, our screen, that gives us a hit of dopamine, and that's why we keep on doing it. And I think, that it's just a massively... It's just, yes. The power of that is just phenomenal.
I know. One of the things that I love about you bringing this particular piece up, when I'm teaching this, even with fairly hardened, I'll say hardened leaders, but what I really mean are hard-edged efficiency experts. They're kind of like, yeah, until I start talking about the biochemistry and the neuroscience and your brain. It seems to stop them in their tracks, because now it's not just sort of like, oh, you HR people. It's more like, oh, yeah, that's our operating system. And this thing that I'm acting like it's a bug, it's actually a feature. What Henry Ford thought was a bug and tried to squash it, I could activate it and get more quality. I could get more customer service. And that, it almost seems to stop him in the tracks, because it's a fact, or as they say in Washington, D.C., a true fact. It's something that they can't go around. It's not an opinion anymore, it's biology. So I actually think that there's also, so it's important what you're saying, and it's also an important way in. So more thought on that later, but it's something that I've been noticing really resonating.
But I think, just personally, the analogy of the dog will stick with me for the rest of my life.
Yes. That's a win.
Because it's horrible, but it's hugely thought-provoking. And I think, when we all look back at our careers or different parts of our lives and just think, actually, when did I turn into the dog and just give up? Because I just submitted. And I think, we have to continue to think of that and push ourselves to, one, be conscious that we're not doing that to our colleagues, but also that the spirit that we have within us doesn't die, and we, continue to jump over and go, okay, I'm going to get there, I can change this, I'm not going to submit. That's right. And, because it's within our power and within our gift, I think.
That's right. That's so nice. And I think so many of us that have worked in organizations where there's a sort of creative apartheid going on, where the people at the top kind of assume they're the ones that can think. They're the ones that get to be creative because, well, we're the smart ones. Come on, let's face it. That kind of an attitude. It is so important to try to turn that and say, no, actually everybody has a seeking system. All of the people that plan their own vacations, that are able to sort of map out their lives, turns out they could actually help a customer in their own way as well. But I don't think that our assumptions are there yet in big or small companies. I think that earlier when we saw that there is some percentage, some lucky percentage, 30% in this room, that don't feel the shock and they're not shocking, that's why I was saying that's such a gift, because I actually think it's something rare. And this might not be a bad place if you're comfortable to think about ending the conversation, because my first book that I wrote, this, Change to Strange, it looked at the sources of a sustained competitive advantage, and it just kind of dawned on me as you were talking. Let's say that activating the seeking system is something that's kind of rare. Lots of companies aren't doing it. But let's also say it's something quite valuable, meaning if it creates meaning and resilience and innovation and experimentation and trying new things. But then let's say it's kind of hard to imitate, because our existing HR systems are such a tool that's in place, and you just keep reaching for that tool because it's in place. The old tool is quite sticky. I can guarantee you, if we go back to me using that saw, I reached for it at every opportunity because it's the saw I had. And I could kind of make it work, almost. So if there's a firm that can figure this out and crack it, and then they have something valuable, rare, and hard to imitate, it becomes a source of sustained competitive advantage. So that's one there. I'll end with that because that's actually really nice. That's why I'm saying I'm so optimistic about this. As firms need to change a lot, those that activate the seeking system win. So thank you. That's a really thought-provoking idea there.
You're welcome.
Nice. Thank you.
We thank Dan Cable, please. Thank you.